Fantastic.
Welcome back to Science Fantastic with Professor Michio Kaku. On Science Fantastic, we profile some of the most amazing, jaw-dropping scientific discoveries which are revolutionizing our world and touching our lives. And leading off, we're going to say a few things about my colleague, Stephen Hawking, who recently passed away. In fact, I recently wrote an op-ed piece talking about the legacy of Stephen Hawking for Fortune magazine. And I've also issued commentary on BBC television and also CBS News about the incredible achievements of my colleague Stephen Hawking. And then, well, I completed my book tour. It was a grueling book tour through San Francisco, LA, Washington, Chicago, you name it. I went through those cities signing your copy of The Future of Humanity. And of course, I got an ocean full of emails and comments about that. And so, of course, in this hour, we will be answering your listener phone calls, but we're also going to answer some of the emails that I get concerning my book, The Future of Humanity. Well, first of all, one comment I've been getting the last few weeks is, what is the lasting legacy of Stephen Hawking? Well, not since Einstein have we had a towering figure of science who could not only communicate the excitement and the splendor of the universe, but also engage in basic research. Now, why was he so popular? Well, he, like Einstein, was in some sense viewed by the public as a messenger from the stars. In other words, the stars are in our dreams. We dream about the stars every night when you go outside and you're surrounded by the splendor of the night sky. You can't help but have this existential shock, realizing that you are part of this incredible universe. And here is Dr. Einstein and Dr. Hawking saying, "Take my hand. Take my hand and I will give you a guided tour through some of the greatest mysteries of the universe itself." So, well, what did he do? Well, first of all, we have two great theories of science. We have the quantum theory, which gives us lasers, transistors, the internet, iPhones, all of that coming from the quantum theory, the theory of atomic physics. And then we have the theory of the very big, relativity, that gives us black holes and big bangs. The problem is, and here's the killer, the problem is that these two theories are based on different assumptions, different physical principles, and different mathematics. And when you try to put them together naively in a shotgun marriage, the whole thing falls apart. The two theories, in some sense, don't like each other. They're incompatible. And so Stephen Hawking was one of the first to begin an attempt to unify these two great theories. Now, Einstein, of course, talked about it, but back in the 1950s, we didn't know anything about the nuclear force. We knew that we could unleash the nuclear force in the atomic bomb. We saw the nuclear force every morning when we look at the sun and we see sunshine. But it wasn't until the 1970s that we began to understand the nuclear force. And so Einstein missed out on the unified field theory, even though he was the one who set the agenda for the next 50 years. And so when Stephen applied quantum mechanics to black holes, he found that black holes are not really black. They emit Hawking radiation, a very faint glow of radiation, meaning that black holes are not forever. They, too, will eventually die. Now, black holes are black because they're so massive that even light itself cannot escape. But if light itself cannot escape, then it must violate quantum mechanics, because quantum mechanics says that even blackness cannot be absolute. That's the uncertainty principle. And so if blackness cannot be absolute, it must be gray. And that was Stephen's great observation. The first application of the quantum theory to Einstein's theory showed that black holes will eventually die. They emit radiation to the point that they eventually run out of fuel, and then they explode, and then they die. And so that gave us a totally new picture of how the universe itself may eventually die. And so Hawking, his contribution to physics was he took the first step toward unifying the quantum theory and relativity. Now, did he succeed? Well, I just wrote an article for Fortune magazine. It turns out the answer is no. Now, why is that? Because when you apply the quantum theory to light, for example, you show that light consists of particles called photons. In fact, when I watch Star Trek, I laugh because Captain Kirk says, "Turn on the photon torpedoes." What is a photon torpedo? It is a flashlight. A flashlight emits trillions upon trillions of photons or particles of light, so a photon torpedo is nothing but an ordinary flashlight. Now, it turns out that when you quantize light, you break it up into packets of energy called quanta. When you apply the same principle to gravity, you get gravitons. Gravitons are particles of gravity. We've never seen them, but we think they must exist if you try to quantize gravity. Now, here's the killer. If you want to win a Nobel Prize, if you want to have your name in lights, if you want to have your name in all the history books, find a way to eliminate all the anomalies and divergences of gravitons. You see, when gravitons bump into each other, the resulting expression mathematically is infinite. Now, that's ridiculous. It means the theory is incomplete. It means the theory is in some sense wrong. That's the problem. Even Hawking could not solve that problem. In fact, toward the end of his life, he was beginning to despair that perhaps in his lifetime he would never live to see the solution to this problem. Now, I think there's some irony here. You see, when Hawking was 21 years old, when he was a youth, he got a death warrant. His doctors told him that he will eventually lose all muscular control of his body and he will die within 3 years of ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease. That was a death warrant. So he decided to concentrate on the biggest problem that he knew of, which is the problem of unification that I just mentioned. So he did not succeed in the final formulation, a formulation of gravitons. However, I firmly believe that one day perhaps another 21-year-old kid will in fact find the solution to this problem, and he will be recognized as the next Einstein, the next Hawking, the next person in this pantheon of geniuses to complete an understanding of the symphony that we call the universe. Okay, well, what I'd like to do is just say a few things about the emails that I'm going to get, that I've been getting, and then we'll throw the lines open because this hour is your hour. This is the time when you can call 612-564-8135 and have your thoughts heard on national radio. Well, when I was touring the country, one persistent question was cost. I mean, what about the cost of exploring outer space? Stephen Hawking said that yes, we have to go into outer space because it's simply too dangerous to put life on just one planet. It turns out that one giant meteor or comet, one plague, one nuclear war, and that's the end of this experiment called humanity. And so he firmly believed that we should do something about it. Well, let's take a short commercial break, and after the break, I'll answer the question of what this new space age is going to cost, and we'll open it up to you. Welcome back to Science Fantastic with Professor Michio Kaku. We're going to throw the lines open in a minute. However, let me answer some of the emails that I've been getting during my book tour. Once again, I went through San Francisco, L.A., Chicago, Washington, New York, Philadelphia, Boston, and I signed your copy of The Future of Humanity. And I imagine some of you then went to eBay and auctioned them off for money. That's right. You can actually make money on my book tour. Well, one persistent question that I get traveling around the country was, what about the cost of this new space age that we're going to go back to the moon starting next year, and we're going to go on to Mars perhaps within 15 years? And I tell people the following. You saw the movie The Martian with Matt Damon, right? Great movie. Well, that movie cost $100 million to make. Now, the Indians send a space probe all the way to Mars for $70 million. In other words, a Hollywood movie about going to Mars costs more than actually going to Mars. That's because of the dropping of the cost of space travel. Not to mention the fact that the cost is being underwritten by private enterprise and entrepreneurs. Elon Musk of SpaceX, Jeff Bezos of Amazon. They are building their own fleet of rockets. That's right, their own fleet of rockets at their own expense. Not one dime of taxpayers' money went into launching of the Falcon Heavy rocket. A rocket which, of course, generated tremendous amount of excitement on the Internet as millions of people watched a moon rocket, that's right, a moon rocket take off from Cape Canaveral, the first time in 50 years that a moon rocket took off from that fabled Cape. And so once again, we're witnessing the fact that A, the cost of space travel is dropping tremendously. B, private entrepreneurs are beginning to foot the bill. And C, we're witnessing the beginning of the era of reusable rockets. If you saw the launch of the Falcon Heavy, you realize that when the rockets came back down again, it was like something from a science fiction movie. 2 rockets coming straight down, landing on their launch pad so they could be reused again. Something straight out of Star Trek. And so for those reasons, the cost of space travel has been dropping, meaning that it's not like the 1960s when you could argue that the space program was eating into funds that should be going to feed the poor and to educate the uneducated. Okay, well, once again, I said that in this hour we're going to be taking your listener phone calls. Okay, let's move right along now to the first listener phone call.
Hello, Doctor. My name is Ethan Houghton. I'm calling from Anchorage, Alaska. I was wondering, what exactly is gravity? Thank you.
Wow. Well, you ask a question that some of the greatest minds of humanity have tackled. First of all, Newton gave us the first approximation to gravity by saying that it's a force of attraction. But many philosophers hated that idea because it meant that action was taking place over a distance. In other words, objects move because they're pushed. I mean, everybody knows that. You push something, it moves. But if something falls to the ground, what is pushing it? Well, Newton didn't know. In fact, we still have a hard time grasping the fact that objects move without being touched. Well, along comes Einstein, who says, well, something really is touching that object. Why are you sitting in your chair right now? Well, mostly this because there's a force of gravity that is grabbing you and pulling you into your chair. But Einstein says no. There's no pull. There really is a push. And that push comes from space itself. Space is curved. And because space is curved, it pushes you down. So in other words, why are you sitting in your chair? It's not because gravity is pulling you down, because there's no such thing as the force of gravity. It's an optical illusion. It is space itself that is pushing you down. Now, people have a hard time getting their heads around it, but we've measured it. We've measured it umpteen times, and we find that each time Einstein is right. That yes, gravity is the bending of space and time. Now, the new wrinkle on this is that we want to quantize this. Just like when we quantize light, we get photons or particles of light. In fact, it was none other than Albert Einstein himself who first introduced the concept of the photon, which is a particle of light. Well, gravity has particles too, and these are called gravitons. So let's get this straight. If the sun were to disappear right now, there would be a shock wave. A shock wave created by the disappearance of our sun. This shock wave is called a gravity wave, and the Nobel Prize last year was given to 3 physicists for discovering the gravity wave predicted by Einstein in 1916. So if the sun were to disappear right now, the shock wave would travel at the speed of light, and that's called a gravity wave. So what is a graviton? It turns out the gravity wave, in turn, consists of trillions upon trillions of little particles moving in a wave-like fashion. Just like an ocean wave is really not a wave at all, it's the motion of trillions upon trillions of molecules. These molecules move in a wave-like pattern that we call an ocean wave. The same thing with gravity. The problem, however, and this is the problem worth a Nobel Prize in physics, if you can solve it, is that the interaction of gravitons leads to nonsense. Nobody has been able to come up with a completely satisfactory explanation of the properties of gravitons. Now, the closest we can get is string theory, which is what I do for a living. String theory does, in fact, say that you can unify gravitons with all the other particles like electrons. However, it has not yet been proven. The Large Hadron Collider is not powerful enough to prove the existence of gravitons. So to answer your question, Newton thought that gravity was a pull. Einstein said no, gravity is a push created by the bending of space and time. The quantum theory says, well, gravity is actually made out of tiny particles called gravitons, and we are at the present time clueless to explain how gravitons interact with each other. Sorry about that. If you can figure that out, you will win the Nobel Prize in Physics. Okay, let's move right along now to the next listener phone call.
Hello, Dr. Kaku. This is Ray McNeely phoning in from Anchorage, listening to KFQD AM 750 and 103.7 FM. Sir, I may be asking a nonsensical question, but considering the various theories, for example, M, string, multiverse, sequential, and CCC, among others, can it be possible that the dark energy in our observable universe, can it be that prior to inflation and at the Big Bang, whereas one particle brought us into this existence, could it be that the antiparticle from that moment has caused a non-observable universe, and that unseen universe is the dark matter or dark energy, hence causing the WMAP and CMB cold spot and EM waves that are in supposedly empty space, or causing a pulling of the universe? Thank you, sir.
Well, the answer to your question is yes. Next question. No, let's try to break that down, because you ask so many things in one question. Let's try to break it down. First of all, you mentioned dark energy. What is dark energy? Dark energy is one of the most intriguing mysteries in all of physics. It is the energy of the Big Bang. What caused the bang? Why is the universe expanding? Well, the short answer is we don't know. The leading theory is that even the vacuum of space has energy. Even nothingness has energy. It was actually Nikola Tesla who talked about this, but of course he didn't have the mathematics. Einstein had the mathematics, and Einstein says, yes, there's a term in his equations which gives you the energy of the expansion of space itself. That's called dark energy, and dark energy, we think, is the engine that drives the expansion of the universe. And it turns out that let's take a short commercial break, and after the break, we're going to talk about dark energy, and is there another parallel universe out there that we are unaware of, and what could cause that dark spot in the cosmic background?
Science Fantastic.
Welcome back to Science Fantastic with Professor Michio Kaku. Before the break, we had a mouthful of questions, so let's try to tackle them one at a time, because we're now talking about some of the deepest secrets of creation itself, the creation of the universe. It turns out that, yes, we had a Big Bang over 13 billion years ago, and that radiation is still circulating around the Earth. and the universe. It's colder now. It's down to the microwave range, and we can actually see it using our microwave satellites. That's right. We can actually photograph the remnants of the fireball which gave birth to the universe itself. This is amazing. Baby pictures of the infant universe when it was about 300,000 years old. It's called the WMAP. If you want to see it, go to nasa.gov, Google WMAP, W-M-A-P, and you'll see this photograph. A photograph of the night sky, and what does it look like? A fireball. It really does look like a fireball. It is the radiation left over from the instant of the Big Bang. Now, the caller who called in mentioned a mystery, a cosmic mystery with regards to this. You see, the explosion was very uniform. It was an explosion. You could see it right on your computer screen by going to nasa.gov, typing in WMAP, but, and this is the killer now, but there's a dark spot. There's a dark spot, a dimple of sorts, in this cosmic background fireball. Normally, when you see a picture of a fireball, it looks pretty spherical. This also should be spherical, except there seems to be a dark spot there. And the listener who called in says, what is responsible for this dark spot? Well, the short answer is we don't know. This is a great mystery. If you could figure this out, your name will go down in the history books. It should be uniform. We think that the original Big Bang underwent something called inflation, which was a turbocharged expansion of the original fireball, which expanded the fireball, evening it out, making sure that the fireball was even in all directions. But there is this anomaly there. What could cause it? Dark energy? We don't know. So this is a mystery that is still unsolved. Some people think maybe it was just an accident. It was not really important at all. Other people think it could reveal a deep secret, some kind of asymmetry, something that breaks the uniformity of the original creation of the universe itself. Well, to be frank, your guess is as good as mine, because we're not talking about the very boundary of what we know about the universe. Okay, let's move right along now to the next listener phone call.
Hi, my name is Sarah. I'm following you on Twitter, and I am calling from Bremerton, Washington. I wanted to know your thoughts on when we will begin work on an elevator system to the International Space Station, or if there will be a new space station equipped with that kind of technology in our lifetime. So very curious about what the future holds for quick access to space. Thank you so much. Have a great night.
Okay, well, in my previous books, I mentioned the fact that a space elevator could, in some sense, take us to outer space, just like Jack and the Beanstalk took Jack into the heavens. However, there are some problems. First of all, when the Eiffel Tower was being built in the 1800s, it was quite a sensation, this gigantic tower to the heavens, and there was a Russian physicist who was intrigued by it, Tsiolkovsky. He's the father of modern rocketry, and he wrote in his memoirs that just like this tower being built in Paris, a tower to the stars, why not just keep on going? Why not keep on going until it reaches outer space? Would it fall down? Well, it's like a ball spinning on a string. Why doesn't the ball fall down? Well, because of centrifugal force. The ball does not fall down when you twirl it on a string. And so he said to himself, maybe the space elevator is the same way. Well, let's take a short commercial break, and after the break, we're going to talk about a gateway to heaven on Science Fantastic. Welcome back to Science Fantastic with Professor Michio Kaku. And once again, if you want to get on Science Fantastic, then give us a call, and perhaps your thoughts will be heard on national radio. Well, before the break, we had a question about building a stairway to heaven. Is it possible that one day we can create a space elevator to take us to the International Space Station and beyond? Well, the whole idea of this stairway to heaven, or a Jacob's ladder into heaven, was first mentioned during the 1800s by the Russian pioneer Tsiolkovsky. He was watching the Eiffel Tower being built, and he asked himself a simple question. What happens if you continue to build the Eiffel Tower, a tower to heaven, and just kept on going? Would it ever fall down? And then he realized that if you take a ball, put it on a string, and spin it around the string, it doesn't fall down. It doesn't fall down because of centrifugal force and centripetal force. And so he realized that if the Eiffel Tower were big enough, it would simply spin and create a gateway to heaven. But there's a catch. There's always a catch somewhere. You can also calculate the tension on the steel cable, and the tension is enough to snap steel. Therefore, the idea was considered useless for the next 100 years. The science fiction writer Arthur C. Clarke wrote a novel about it, but it wasn't taken seriously because the steel would snap because of the tension created by spinning around the Earth. Well, now comes nanotechnology and carbon nanotubes and sheets of carbon called graphene. It turns out the tensile strength of a cable of carbon nanotubes is greater than that necessary to create a space elevator. So all of a sudden, a mini gold rush was created. NASA gave funding for preliminary investigation into a space elevator made out of carbon nanotubes. Carbon in its pure form is the strongest substance known to science. A sheet of graphene will balance an elephant. You take an elephant, put the elephant on a pencil, balance the pencil on a sheet of graphene, and graphene will not break. It is stronger than steel. Forget steel, it's stronger than diamonds. It's the strongest substance known to science. So what's the catch? The catch here is that pure carbon, pure atomic carbon, one layer of carbon atoms, can only be made to about the size of a postage stamp. Anything larger than impurities start to build up, ruining the strength of carbon. This means that it's an engineering problem, not a physics problem. If in principle you can create a sheet of carbon big enough to create a cable to take you to heaven, then that would do it. But it has to be pure. The slightest impurity will cause it to break. So NASA has looked at funding for the space elevator, but, well, to be frank, don't hold your breath. I think it may take till the end of the century to solve this engineering question, and that is, how do you make pure carbon nanotubes and sheets of carbon nanotubes such that you can create a cable thousands of miles long that's not going to break? And this means that in the future, perhaps by the end of the century, you'll be able to go into a space elevator and push the up button and slowly watch you as you go into heaven. This means that, yes, it's definitely possible. Carbon nanotubes could just be the trick. The problem is to make pure carbon nanotubes sufficient to take you to heaven, just like Jack and the Beanstalk. Jack and the Beanstalk really didn't know where the beanstalk came from, but the fact that the Earth is spinning means that the beanstalk will not fall because of centrifugal force. So on paper, it looks great. This could revolutionize the space program. No more booster rockets, no more accidents on takeoff, no more problems with that. No, you simply go into an elevator, hit the up button, and then slowly go into outer space, just the way Tsiolkovsky envisioned back in the 1800s during the building of the Eiffel Tower. Welcome back to Science Fantastic with Professor Michio Kaku. Give us a call and have your thoughts heard on National Radio. Okay, let's move on now to the next listener phone call.
Hello, this is Kenneth Eng from West California, author of Weird Dragons and Other New Monsters, listening on the Genesis Radio Network. Last year in 2017, I published a book about a creature called the Mirror Monster, which automatically reflects any damage that is inflicted upon it back to the attacker. That is, if you punch a Mirror Monster, you take the same damage that you inflicted on her, leaving both of you injured automatically. Is there anything in science that would be able to produce this type of effect in real life, aside from the obvious quantum entanglement? Furthermore, I also created another creature called the Weird Dragon that gains power from the light of Jupiter and can only be killed by gold swords. Is it possible for the appearance of Jupiter to affect organisms on Earth in the same way that the moon affects menstrual cycles? Lastly, I want to say my respect for the late Stephen Hawking, who died last week, and how much his discoveries influenced my career as an author. How did Dr. Hawking affect your career?
Well, you ask a lot of questions, so let's try to break it up one by one. First of all, what I do is I work on completing Einstein's dream of a theory of everything. We want an equation no more than perhaps 1 inch long that will allow us to, quote, read the mind of God. Just like E equals mc squared is an equation 1 inch long, it unlocked the secret of the stars. A secret that was kept hidden for thousands of years was unraveled by Einstein when he wrote down E equals mc squared. So, Stephen and I worked in the same general area. He made the first big breakthrough, applying quantum mechanics to black holes, showing that black holes are not really black at all. They're gray, they emit radiation. But all of us were working on the final theory, not just the application of quantum theory to black holes. No. We wanted the whole shebang. We wanted that 1 inch equation. We wanted a new theory altogether that would explain everything. Now, at the present time, the only theory which comes close is string theory. However, it's not proven. The Large Hadron Collider is not big enough to prove whether or not this is, in fact, the theory of everything. Now, you mentioned a whole bunch of other things, so let's back up. First of all, mythical animals, do they really exist? The Loch Ness Monster, for example, Bigfoot. Well, it's always possible. However, biologists say, first of all, that you have to have a breeding population. That is, what is the smallest number of abominable snowmen can you have, and be it self-sustaining? If you have only 1 or 2, like an Adam and an Eve, then it would be very easy to extinguish it. However, once you have a breeding population of maybe 50 to 100, it becomes stable. Now, if you have a breeding population that large, it means you also have junk left over. You have waste products, you have bones, you have carcasses left over by that. And by looking at Loch Ness, we find no evidence of this. No bones of ancestors of Loch Ness Monster, no feces, no garbage left over after their breakfast or dinner. As a consequence, we tend to think that maybe these animals are in fact mythical rather than real. You also mentioned Jupiter. Yes, Jupiter has moons called, for example, Europa. Europa is very intriguing because it has an ocean perhaps larger in volume than the oceans of the planet Earth. Amazing, because our oceans are only skin deep compared to the rest of the Earth. Europa, most of the inside of Europa is in fact a liquid ocean. What kinds of animals can live therefore in Europa? Perhaps aquatic animals. Already NASA has plans to launch the Europa Clipper to that moon of Jupiter, and after that, perhaps put a submarine. That's right, a submarine into the ocean of Europa, a moon of Jupiter. Now, we're not there yet, of course. That's still years into the future, but that is perhaps the most likely place to find life on the planet Earth. Okay, well, let's move on to the next listener phone call.
Hi, I'm Dave Rathcott, and I have a question from Philadelphia. I was wondering if it would be possible, in any theoretical sense, to time travel digitally, meaning the ability to send information digitally through time. Thank you.
Well, actually, you ask a rather intriguing question. Many scientists believe that sending a large object backwards in time may be quite difficult. You would have to have tremendous amounts of energy, the Planck energy, You can also have exotic forms of energy called negative energy to keep the gateway open so it doesn't close on it. And if you read a copy of my book, The Physics of the Impossible, I give you the basic ingredients necessary to perhaps build a time machine. You ask a more intriguing question. If we can't send a human backwards in time, why not send a message? A digital message that takes almost no energy. Think of Morse code, for example. How much energy does it take to send a Morse code message? Not much. But we could do even better than that. A molecular image, a molecular message, perhaps could be sent through a wormhole backwards in time. And so some people have said that aliens from outer space, if they're very advanced, they may be able to create a wormhole back into the past and then send a message back into the past so that they could alter the fabric of space and time without having to send a large object, which is very difficult. Okay, let's take a short commercial break, and after that we're going to continue a discussion of traveling to the past. Welcome back to Science Fantastic with Professor Michio Kaku. That's right, the lines are open right now, and you're not going to get a busy signal. You get right to us. So let's move on now to the first listener phone call.
Professor Kaku, this is Stu calling from Muldoon, Alaska. I have a question. A relative of mine had macular degeneration and went blind before she died. She claimed that she experienced problems with her eyes when she was looking at the stars in the form of a sudden pain in both eyes. I'm wondering, is there something that can affect the human eyes in deep space or from a satellite? She eventually went blind and died, but I've always thought about what she said. It was a sudden experience, and she still had sight after it. She went to the eye doctors and eventually had macular degeneration. Thank you for your show. We love it.
Okay, well, yes, macular degeneration is one of the main reasons why the elderly have problems with their vision. It causes clouding of their eye, especially in the cornea region. And you mentioned two questions. First of all, is there any phenomenon which can interfere with your eyesight coming from the stars? And the answer is yes. And the second question is, well, can that happen to you on the Earth by simply looking at the stars? And the answer to that is probably no. First of all, the astronauts that we've had on Science Fantastic, and we've had a number of astronauts, they tell me that looking at outer space, they see flashes of light right inside their eyeball. What are these flashes of light caused by? Cosmic rays. Cosmic rays perhaps caused by colliding black holes in outer space. Think about that. You're actually witnessing perhaps cataclysmic cosmic events that took place billions of years ago that are manifested as subatomic particles whizzing through your eyeball, causing streaks of light. On one hand, it is a little bit dangerous because, of course, astronauts have to worry about radiation in outer space. But on the other hand, it is incredible that your eyeball is able to pick up this kind of radiation. First of all, when a subatomic particle from outer space races through the atmosphere, it rips the electrons off the atoms, creating ions. The ions then can form a trail by condensing, let's say, water vapor along that trail, and that's called a cloud chamber. A cloud chamber is what I built when I was in high school when I wanted to detect antimatter coming from a sodium-22 source. I put sodium-22 inside a cloud chamber with a magnetic field, turned on the magnetic field, and I saw tracks of subatomic particles, anti-electrons, traveling inside my cloud chamber. Now, this will also happen inside your eyeball. Cosmic rays will go through your eyeball, the aqueous humor of your eyeball, causing it to ionize, and the ionization causes a slight electrical discharge in the form of a spark. And so, yes, astronauts do see these sparks taking place right inside their eyeball. Now, does it hurt? And the answer is no. So could this be the mechanism that perhaps your relative felt? Well, perhaps not, because this radiation is very faint and it cannot be felt, but it does mean that, yes, in some sense, your eyeball can be tuned to events happening in outer space. Okay, let's take the next listener phone call.
Hello, Dr. Michio Kaku. This is Jack Connor from Long Beach. I heard a story once in one of your books that you built something like a nuclear reactor when you were a teenager in your garage. And specifically that you had some kind of family member drive you around to get parts for it. I was just wondering if it's possible to tell the story on air. Thank you. And I cannot wait to read The Future of Humanity. Take care.
Great. Well, I'm glad you like my book, The Future of Humanity. And yes, it's true. When I was in high school, I was at the age of 16, 17, I built a 2.3 million electron volt Betatron electron accelerator in my mom's garage. First of all, I went to Westinghouse and I got 400 pounds of transformer steel, which I then cut up and shaped in my high school machine shop. Then I went to Varian Associates and I got 22 miles of copper wire. And, of course, I had to wind this gigantic spool of wire. So I went to the high school football field. I put the gigantic spool of wire on the goalpost, suspended it from the goalpost, and gave it to my father. He then grabbed the wire, ran to the 50-yard line, gave it to my mother. My mother then took it at the 50-yard line, ran to the goalpost, and we wound 22 miles of copper wire on the high school football field. Well, finally it was ready. It consumed 6 kilowatts of power, and I'll tell you what happened when I turned it on after the break. Welcome back to Science Fantastic with Professor Michio Kaku. The lines are open. This is your hour. This is the chance when you can ask that question about science that's always been bothering you. But before the break, we had a question about, well, my science fair project. Yes, when I was in high school, I was enamored of antimatter. So I went to the old Atomic Energy Commission, now called the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and I asked for permission to get sodium-22, which is radioactive, and I put in the cloud chamber that I built and put in a magnetic field, and with a camera I took gorgeous photographs of antimatter in my mom's garage. Well, I wasn't satisfied with that. I wanted to create a beam of antimatter, rather than just analyze the emission of antimatter from sodium-22. And for that, you need an atom smasher. So I went to Stanford University, which was not too far from my high school, and I got the blueprint for a Betatron accelerator. A Betatron accelerator is one of the main designs for an atom smasher. In fact, it's used in hospitals today to create that beam of X-rays sometimes used in medical therapy. Well, this is when I was in high school. So I got the blueprint, I got 400 pounds of transformer steel, 22 miles of copper wire, and I built a Betatron accelerator in my mom's garage. It consumed 6 kilowatts of power, an enormous amount of power, drained the electricity in my mom's circuits, and then it was ready. I closed my eyes, shut my ears, and I plugged in my atom smasher. I heard this huge crackling sound, just like in a mad scientist laboratory. 6 kilowatts of raw power surged through my capacitor bank, and then I heard this pop, pop, pop sound as I blew out every single circuit breaker in the house. You know, I was on the Larry King show once, and I told him the story, and Larry King told me, well, as a young kid, you were not only just the only person to have an atom smasher in your mom's garage, perhaps you were the only one, period, to have an atom smasher because you'll blow the neighborhood block apart. Well, there was no chance that I would blow the block apart, as Larry King told me. However, I blew out all the fuses in my mom's garage. My poor mom, she'd come home from a hard day's work, and she would say to herself, okay, where is the fuse box? How many fuses did he blow out today? And she must have wondered to herself, why couldn't I have a son who plays basketball? Why can't I have a son who plays baseball? And for God's sake, why can't he find a nice Japanese girlfriend? Why does he have to build these gigantic machines in the garage? Well, those machines helped to change my life. I went to the National Science Fair, and I met Edward Teller, father of the hydrogen bomb. Now, I did not have to explain to Edward Teller what antimatter was. He, of course, was at the forefront of atomic physics for many a decade and helped to build the atomic bomb and later the hydrogen bomb. He took a liking to me, and he became my mentor. In fact, I used to go to his house several times a year in Berkeley, and I used to talk with him about science, politics, and the great universe around us. And so that atom smasher helped to change my life because he arranged for me to get a scholarship to Harvard so I could begin my career as a physicist. Okay, let's move on now to the next listener phone call.
Hi there, my name is Derek Allsweet. I'm calling from Chico, California. My question is about time being circular. I'm watching the show Dark on Netflix right now. At the beginning, it says that time is a circle, not a straight line. It also says something about a 33-year reset or restart of time. Is there any truth to either of these things? Thank you for your answers.
Well, the short answer is probably no, but it makes for great science fiction, and I love science fiction. But let me explain. Isaac Newton thought that time was like an arrow. You fire it, never deviates, the past is the past, the future is the future, and it progresses evenly throughout the universe, so that 1 second on the Earth is 1 second on the moon. 12 o'clock on the Earth is 12 o'clock throughout the entire universe. 1 second is 1 second everywhere in the universe. Well, that's a Newtonian picture, which is common sense. However, then along comes Einstein, who says, not so fast. Time is a river. It's a river which can meander, speed up, or slow down. And as a consequence, time is not absolute. It can bend. It can speed up, slow down. And we measure this all the time with our devices. This is not science fiction. Right here in my laboratory, in our laboratory here at the college, we actually measure this. Now, along comes string theory and says, wait a minute. Perhaps the river of time can fork into two rivers, or perhaps the river of time can have whirlpools in the river of time. This is something that we take very seriously. These are called closed time-like loops. In other words, they are time machines. When the river of time warps and goes back on itself to create a circle. And so in that sense, you could have a circular time. Now, then the next question is, how do you do this? Is this really physically realizable? And that's when things begin to break down. You see, in order to speed up or slow down the fabric of time, you have to have a star. You have to have gigantic amounts of energy to do that, like a black hole, for example. You just can't do this in your living room. We're talking about fabulous amounts of energy. And to have the river of time fork into two rivers, or to create a closed time-like loop, you need two things. One, tremendous amounts of positive energy to create a whirlpool in the fabric of time. Second, you need negative energy to stabilize it. Those are the two basic ingredients. Now, it turns out that positive energy, it exists in the form of a black hole, but we cannot manipulate black holes easily. That's an understatement. Second of all, once you can have tremendous amounts of positive energy, you have to stabilize it with negative energy. Negative energy is extremely difficult to manipulate. In the laboratory, we have created it, but only in minute quantities. You need tremendous amounts of negative energy in order to stabilize this wormhole. So to answer your question, yes, we physicists do look at the question of circular time, but is it practical? Well, not for us. Maybe for an intelligent species much more advanced than us. Now, if you saw the movie Interstellar, that was a movie whose consultants were PhD physicists. In fact, Kip Thorne won the Nobel Prize last year. He was one of the consultants for that film, Interstellar. And so when I thought to myself, how did he get around the fact that we humans do not have enough energy to create these gigantic interstellar machines? How is he going to get around that? And there was a very clever answer to that question. It turns out that the wormhole, which took us to the outer reaches of the galaxy, where did it come from in the movie with Matthew McConaughey? It came from our descendants in the future. So we cannot create the machine of that power, but our children's 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 children, ... were capable of building the machine and sending a message backwards in time, giving us the instructions as to how to navigate through a wormhole. That's how they got around that. Pretty sneaky, I thought. Okay, well, let's move right along now to the next listener phone call.
Hi, Dr. Kaku. This is Chance Smith from Cincinnati, Ohio, and I was just wondering, in the future, do you think long-distance space travel will be solved by going faster or at the speed of light, or by, in like another manner, such as reconfiguring the atoms in a different place to be a different you, but they'd have the same information as you? Just basically, they just transfer the information, not the physical atoms itself. Thank you.
Well, you're absolutely right that it is possible, well within the known laws of physics, to have information travel throughout the galaxy. The simplest method is what I call laser porting, and I mentioned this in my book, The Future of Humanity. It's a technology that we should have by the end of the century. First of all, we are in the process of digitizing people at the present time. Believe it or not, there's a Silicon Valley company which will digitize everything known about you. In other words, digital immortality. Let's take a short commercial break, by the way, and afterwards we're going to talk about the question, can you become immortal digitally? And if so, can you travel at the speed of light throughout the galaxy? Welcome back to Science Fantastic with Professor Michio Kaku. Well, before the break, we had a call about is it possible that we can digitally send ourselves throughout the universe? And the answer, surprisingly enough, is yes. First of all, we are in the process now, not tomorrow, now, of digitizing people. In other words, in the future, when you go to the library and you take a book out about Winston Churchill, not only will you read about him, you'll talk to him. You'll have a conversation with him. A holographic image of Winston Churchill will appear to you, and you can ask any question and have a very interesting conversation with Winston Churchill, because all his videotapes, all his memoirs, everything known about him has been digitized, and I would love to have a conversation with Albert Einstein. I mean, think about that. Everything known about him, his theories, his interviews, would be digitized, put in an avatar in a computerized form, and one day you will also be digitized so that you will be immortal as a digital avatar. This avatar will look like you, talk like you, have all your mannerisms, and by the end of the century, we'll have the Connectome project finished, and it will have all your memories as well. That's right. We're going to map the neural pathways of the entire human brain. This is called the Connectome project. Every neuron will be digitized, and so you will live forever, even though your biological body has died. Your digital fingerprint, with all your memories, everything known about you, will survive. And then I think we should put it on a laser beam and send the laser beam to the stars. Think about that. Your consciousness, your personality can be shot to the moon in 1 second. On the moon, there is a mainframe which downloads your connectome and then puts you in a robotic avatar. This avatar is not digital. It is robotic. It is superhuman. It can live on Mars, Jupiter, the moon, anywhere you want. It has a superhuman body. You can perform superhuman feats, and it is perfect. You're handsome, you're gorgeous, all your desires of your youth are fulfilled in this mechanical avatar. And then when you get bored, you can go back onto the laser beam and laser port yourself to the next star, the next galaxy. And at the speed of light, you can begin to explore the universe. Now, this is physically possible by the end of the century. And I personally think, let me stick my neck out, I personally think this already exists. That aliens from outer space perhaps have already mastered the art of laser porting themselves across the galaxy. Perhaps next to the Earth there's a superhighway of billions of souls zapping their way across the galaxy. And we humans are too primitive and too dumb to know it. You know, my friends who are PhD physicists, like myself, they spend a whole lifetime searching for alien messages in radio from outer space. And I tell them, why radio? I mean, radio is so 20th century. They should laser port themselves across the galaxy. Why bother with radio? But unfortunately, that's all we do. When we look for alien life in outer space, all we do is look at radio emissions from alien civilizations. I think there could be a laser port highway next to us, and we're clueless, absolutely clueless about its existence. Okay, well, let's move right along to the next listener phone call.
Hello, my name is Eric. I'm actually from Twitter, and I'm calling from Los Angeles. My question is, do you find yourself optimistic about humanity? It's kind of vague, but by this, I mean, have you seen yourself become more and more confident over the years that we, as a species, will become spacefaring, or at the very least, that will far increase the standard of living of near every individual on the planet? Or do you find yourself worrying for our future and that we may not reach these goals? And maybe do you have friends and colleagues who may disagree with you? Thanks again.
Well, you ask a very, very important question. Am I optimistic or pessimistic about the future? And my personal philosophy is very simple. I personally believe that the smallest unit of history is the decade. Anything smaller than that, and you're talking about random fluctuations. You get all mired up on these little blips that are of no consequence. However, when you look at history decade by decade, going back to the 80s, going back to the 40s, going back to the turn of the century, you realize the enormous, absolutely staggering amount of progress that's being made. Now, you may say to yourself, well, the last 50 years we had the Cold War, and history pretty much stood still during that 50-year period of time. But no, if you take a look at the average human being, you realize that in the last several decades, hundreds of millions of people entered the middle class, especially in China and in India. Hundreds of millions, people that were once upon a time confined to abject poverty, disease, perpetual warfare and strife, are now beginning to have aspirations of a middle-class lifestyle. And so when you look on that scale, the scale of decades to centuries, then you realize that, well, yeah, there are setbacks like World War I and World War II, but in the main, things got better. Back in the 1800s, we had kings and queens, for God's sakes, that were absolute rulers. Their rule was law, no democracy, no input. And I think that is a tremendous plus for humanity. Another plus for humanity is the development of the Internet. Dictators love ignorance. They love poverty because then they can control their subjects. If the subjects were rich and their subjects were educated, well, they would overthrow the dictator. And so when I was a kid, I still remember the concept of dictator for life. It was the Cold War, and if you had a patron, the United States or the Soviet Union, you were a pawn of one of the two superpowers. You were permanent. You were a dictator for life. The joke was the only way we could remove you was in a coffin. Well, those days are gone. Now we have dictator for a few months because of the fact that the Internet has spread information around the universe so that people are saying to themselves, why do I have to live like this? Why do I have to be poor? Because other countries live in freedom and prosperity. And so they overthrow their dictators. And dictator for life is a term that we don't use anymore. Then the other question is, if in the main things are getting better, then how come people are so pessimistic? Well, I think it's because of genetics. Let's face it. Our basic personality has not changed for thousands of years, and our ancestors, for the most part, were pessimistic, fearful monkeys. I mean, think about it for a moment. You realize that if our ancestors were bold, and they were totally optimistic, and they were fearless, well, most of them would probably die, and they didn't have progeny to carry on their genes. Our ancestors were timid. Our ancestors were pessimistic because their kids survived to spread their genes to become us. Welcome back to Science Fantastic with Professor Michio Kaku. In this hour, we're taking your listener phone calls by giving us a call at 612-564-8135. Well, before the break, we had a very profound question, and that is, am I basically optimistic or pessimistic about the future? Well, first of all, let me be clear. Nobody knows the future. I'm a physicist. I'm not a soothsayer. I'm not a fortune teller. I look at trends. Trends because we physicists create the future. We're the ones who invented the transistor, the laser. We invented television, X-ray machines, MRI scans. We created the space program. In fact, if you think about it, most of the inventions of the 20th century can be traced back to a physicist. And when we create these things, we realize that we are changing human history for the better as a consequence. Now, some people think that all these wonders come from aliens from outer space. I get a lot of calls saying, Professor, maybe at Roswell we captured a flying saucer, reverse engineered all their technology, and bingo, voila, we have the iPhone. That's where the Internet comes from, alien technology. And I say, no. These technologies, some of them were created by friends of mine. Charlie Towns, the guy just down the hall from me at Berkeley, he's the guy who invented the laser, for God's sake. And so you realize that it was physicists who created much of the architecture. It was not aliens from outer space. And I tell people that if you've ever been in a flying saucer and talked to these aliens from outer space, I tell them that the next time they kidnap you, for God's sake, steal something. I don't care what it is, an alien paperweight. There's no law against stealing from an extraterrestrial. No law whatsoever. You will not be prosecuted for stealing from an alien civilization. So anyway, the point I'm raising is simple. Our ancestors were timid. Our ancestors were fearful. Our ancestors were worried about the future. Our ancestors were worried about anything new. Now, why is that? Because their children survived. As a consequence, we are their children. We are their progeny. Our ancestors, which were too bold, too optimistic, too open about new dangers, well, they got eaten up by the tigers. Their children did not survive to talk about it. You see, there's no gene for science. However, there is a gene for superstition. There is a gene for jumping to conclusions. There is a gene for seeing things that are not there because they were good for us. In the forest, it was good that you saw things that didn't exist because 9 times out of 10, it was nothing. But that one time, it saved your butt. That one time, it was, in fact, a lion hiding in the forest. That's why when you see a picture of random squirrels, circles and squirrels, you think that there is an image. You think there's something lurking in that swirl of lines. Because our brain is hardwired to see things that are not really there. You can do this, of course, with a simple Rorschach test. Get an ink blot of random patterns created by an ink blot, and you will see things without your permission. Even if you tell yourself, I'm not going to see anything, I'm not going to see anything, and you see an ink blot, you will see something, because your brain is hardwired to see things that are not there, because it helped us in the forest. So when we were in the forest, before the creation of science, it was good for us that we were fearful, pessimistic. We saw things when there was nothing really there. And we believed in magic and superstition. And there's probably a gene for all of this, but there's no gene for science. Science is an acquired taste. It's due to the fact that we can reproduce and test and falsify these statements. That's why we believe in science, not because there's a gene for science. And that's why I tend to think that people who are overly pessimistic are giving in to their ancestral genetics into believing that all is bad, woe is me. Okay, well, let's move on to the next listener phone call.
Hi, my name is Nathan. I live in Los Angeles. I guess my question is, I know neural regeneration isn't possible right now, but will it be possible in our lifetime? I know it's kind of a hot topic with neuroscientists, but I was wondering how close we are, if at all. Thank you.
Well, you ask a question whether or not regeneration is possible. And by that, I guess you mean regeneration of organs of the body. Like, for example, a salamander. If you rip off an arm or a leg from a salamander, the salamander will regenerate it, but we cannot. If you lose an arm or a leg, they're gone forever. And the question is it possible to regenerate human organs? Well, in principle, the answer is yes, but we now know the mechanism by which regeneration takes place. By analyzing very carefully the cellular structure of salamanders that can regenerate organs, we realize that it's stem cells. Stem cells that allow the salamander to then regrow arms and legs. Now, we are mammals. It turns out that we lost that ability. Once upon a time, years and years ago, millions of years ago, mammals and reptiles shared a common heritage. However, when we became mammals, we lost that ability to regenerate human organs. Now, of course, if you saw Spider-Man, and you know that in the Spider-Man movies, he's up against the lizard, who can, in fact, regenerate organs of the body. And that's why he's one of Spider-Man's big enemies. However, at the present time, we scientists have not yet been able to reproduce this fact. However, stem cell technology is one of the hot areas, and it is possible that we are now teasing apart the mechanism, the genetic mechanism that allows reptiles to do this, but we have not yet been able to duplicate it for human beings. However, I think it's only a matter of time before we make headway in this direction, but it's not here yet. Welcome back to Science Fantastic with Professor Michio Kaku. On Science Fantastic, we profile the amazing, jaw-dropping scientific discoveries which are revolutionizing our world and touching our lives. Well, once again, I had a very successful book tour. Perhaps I signed your copy of The Future of Humanity, and I got a ton of questions. And so I'll just answer a few of them, and then we'll go to the listener phone calls that you've been sending me. One question I often got was, what is the timetable for our exploration of outer space? For 50 years, we've been spinning wheels. NASA was the agency to nowhere. We didn't go anywhere. We didn't do anything in outer space, except, of course, maybe the space station and a few space probes. But we didn't carry out the spirit of exploration. What's the timetable? Well, the timetable is very simple. Starting next year, December 2019, NASA is going to go back to the moon. For the first time in 50 years, we're going to send the unmanned space capsule, Orion, around the moon. So it's on the agenda. Funding has been approved. We're going back to the moon. And then 3 years after that, we're going to send astronauts to the moon. So we are going to go back to the moon. And what are the astronauts going to do? They're going to build a space station going around the moon, so we'll have a permanent presence in outer space. You know, it takes only 3 days to go to the moon. That's right, just 3 days. You can go on Monday and come back on the weekend. In fact, I firmly believe that sometime in the future, people will honeymoon on the moon. Space tourism is going to become a reality very soon. For $200,000, you too can go into outer space. In the future, perhaps you'll be able to see the moon as a tourist destination. Now, Mars, of course, is more difficult. Mars is a lot farther away. It'll take not just 1 week for a round trip, but maybe 2 years for a round trip mission. However, that's NASA's timetable. Elon Musk has his own timetable as well. And he says, bah, humbug. Too many bureaucrats in NASA, too many people that are slowing things down, and he thinks he can go to Mars in a few months, not 2 years. And so we think that sometime around 2030, if not earlier, if Elon Musk's projections are correct, we will in fact go to Mars. Now, what about beginning to change the atmosphere of Mars? That is going to take longer. We're talking about perhaps by the end of the century having a permanent settlement on Mars. And then the next question I get is, well, does that mean we're going to evacuate the Earth? Or does that mean we're going to flee global warming and get rid of global warming by leaving the planet Earth? And the answer to that is no. First of all, nobody is talking about evacuating the Earth and moving to Mars. That simply costs too much money. And second of all, global warming is a problem that we have to solve as Earthlings on the Earth. We can't go to Mars to escape global warming. No, we got to clean up our own act. Because some people are afraid that just like we messed up the Earth, we're going to mess up Mars as well. And so then the question is, well, what is the timetable for beginning to change the atmosphere of Mars? Well, as I mentioned in my book, I think the first settlements on Mars will, first of all, unveil solar panels to create energy to energize their spaceport. And the first spaceport could actually be underground in a lava tube. Lava tubes are caves left over from the creation of Mars, and they're right there. You don't have to build them. They're right there. So the first space station on the moon could be a lava tube. And then when you build structures on Mars, we can duplicate the soil of Mars on the Earth. We can create brick out of Martian soil. This has already been done. And so one of the first things we'll do is to create brick structures on Mars because of the fact that brick can be made from the Martian soil. And then you mine the ice. You can extract drinking water from the ice. Also hydrogen for rocket fuel. Oxygen for breathing, all from water. So we'll have to set up mining operations to mine the water of Mars. And then after that, agriculture, we're going to get started by creating genetically modified algae and genetically modified crops in order to create an agriculture on Mars. So all these things are doable, but it's going to take some time. But as I mentioned before, the cost of space travel is dropping to the point where all these become real possibilities. Okay, once again, the book is called The Future of Humanity, available in your bookstore, or you can get a copy at Amazon. But now, let's go to the listener phone calls. If you want to get on Science Fantastic and ask a question, make a comment, give us a call at 612-564-8135. Leave your name, call letters of the radio station, and the city you're calling from, and maybe you can get on national radio. Okay, let's move on now to the next listener phone call.
Hello, my name is Amy Rossi. I'm calling from Seattle. I have a question. If you have found a way to measure the resistance of dark matter. Thank you.
Well, you ask a question that is very embarrassing because we know very little about the physical properties of dark matter. First of all, every high school textbook is wrong talking about this great universe of ours. Publishers have had to rewrite many a textbook. All textbooks say basically that the universe is made out of atoms. That sounds like a reasonable proposal. Everything you see around you is made out of atoms, but it's actually wrong. You see, most of the universe is made out of dark matter and dark energy, things which are invisible, but dark matter holds the galaxy together. And we actually live in a wind of dark matter. It turns out that most of the dark matter surrounds the galaxy far from the planet Earth, but there is some dark matter perhaps in your living room. That's right. The Earth is moving in the galactic dust. And the galactic dust, we think some of it contains dark matter, and we are actually moving in that wind. Now, you mentioned the question, what about the resistance of dark matter? Well, when you have air resistance in the form of drag and friction because air is quite dense. In the Earth, dark matter is extremely rare. In fact, we have yet to detect it in the laboratory. Believe it or not, we physicists have created gigantic swimming pools of fluid to look for tracks left by dark matter, and so far we find nothing. Sorry about that. Welcome back to Science Fantastic with Professor Michio Kaku. The lines are open. Okay, let's move on to the next listener phone call.
Hello, my name is Jerry Todd Coverstone. I actually am calling you from a link that I have found on Twitter that just showed up. I am the inventor of the propellantless drive that you see in the video that I retweeted back to you. It is not fake. It is actually very real. My biggest issue is that I'm transgendered, and trying to get the local media or even the local physics department at IUPUI here in Indianapolis is a bit hard to get anybody's attention, despite the fact that the device is very real and you can see it working. What I'd like to know is what will it take for an inventor who creates such a thing to actually get the attention of people who could actually do something with it. I've got plans to make one that'll be strong enough to lift. That one weighs 6 pounds. It produces about 2 pounds of thrust. The next one should be able to produce 20 pounds of thrust, and it'll probably weigh around 10 pounds. It really is reactionless, propellantless. The forces are internal. There's nothing on the bottom. There's nothing grabbing the floor. There's no strings attached. This sort of thing can certainly be used on the International Space Station as soon as possible to help kind of pull it back up into higher orbit when the orbit decays. Thank you.
Okay, well, you ask a very important question, a question that I often get, because quite a few inventors, quite a few budding scientists email me, and they say, I got something, I got a theory. I'm just dying to show people the correctness of my test apparatus, my equipment, my theory, but no one will talk to me. What am I going to do? Well, let's break it down as to what you're going to do if you have a theory which you think is going to change everything, either a theory or a practical working model or an invention. What should you do? Well, first of all, most of the questions I get come from amateur physicists who say that, well, forget Einstein. They are the next Einstein. They got a theory that's even better than Einstein, but no one will talk to me. What am I going to do? Well, the first thing you should do is publish your article. You should get a sheet of paper, write down the equations that you have, the theory that you have in mathematical form, and send it to Physical Review magazine. Physical Review magazine is the magazine of the APS, the American Physical Society. It is the premier organization of physicists in the United States and perhaps even in the world. They have referees. In fact, I'm a referee. I referee papers written by my colleagues, and in the same way, you can get a free referee. It doesn't cost anything. You can get a scientific evaluation of your theory. I can tell you right now, however, that given the fact that so many people write me their theory, most of their theory consists of what we call word salad. That is, you get a bunch of highfalutin words, mix it together like a salad, and voila, there's your theory. Well, that don't cut it. You have to put it in some kind of logical, mathematical fashion to make sense out of it. You can't simply put words like space, dimension, energy. You can't put these words together in a word salad, come up with a very high-sounding concept, which is empty. Because the people reading your paper are going to be professional physicists like myself. They can spot a fake from a mile away. So what you should do is put it in mathematical form. Second, once you put it in mathematical form, what should be in that paper? You simply can't say Einstein was wrong. No, you have to lay out an experiment that can show Einstein was wrong, and you have to show where in Einstein's theory that the mistake is. You simply can't say I'm the next Einstein was wrong. That's not enough. Third, what is the content of what you have to say? If you believe that you have the unified field theory, you have to have two ingredients in that paper. A, you have to explain all of Einstein's theory. There's a tensor equation that is an equation of general relativity. It's about 2 inches long. Your paper has to explain that 2-inch equation. Then you have the quantum theory. The quantum theory in its highest form is called the Standard Model. It has 36 quarks. It has 19 free parameters. It has all sorts of particles like leptons and hadrons. Your theory has to explain that. Your theory has to explain why we have quarks, why we have leptons, hadrons, why we have the weak interactions, strong interactions. You simply cannot say that I have the theory of the universe. You have to explain the quantum theory. In other words, you have to build on the past. You can't simply start all over again from scratch and say that I'm the next Einstein. No. You have to build from what is already there. Now, let's say you're an inventor. What are you going to do? Well, first of all, you should write up the blueprint, create a prototype, and get a patent. As simple as that. On the Internet, you can see instructions as to how to get a patent. You may want to get a patent lawyer, but the first thing you want to do is to get a patent because, well, maybe you're onto something. In which case, you want to have a patent to protect it. Then, if you think your idea has commercial implications, well, there are companies which will try to commercialize your invention, but first you need a working prototype. Okay, very essential, or else no one's going to believe you. And, of course, you may want to videotape it and then get, other scientists to say that, yes, this invention is correct. However, I should tell you right now, the patent clerks in the patent office are onto it. That is, if someone claims to get energy from nothing to create a perpetual motion machine, immediately the red flags go up. Because that, of course, would change not just invention history, it would change human history if you can create something that gives you free energy, something for nothing, violates some of the cherished principles of science. As Carl Sagan once said, incredible facts, as Carl Sagan once said, remarkable claims require remarkable proof. And it means that if you have a remarkable claim, you better be sure you have the documentation, you have the videotapes, you have the notebooks, and you have the theory to back up your remarkable claim. And then, of course, good luck. There's a certain amount of luck that's involved. But first, write up the blueprints, get a working prototype, get a patent. Get a patent attorney, and if you want to commercialize it, there are companies which, for a price, will take your invention and start to commercialize it. Okay, let's move on to the next listener phone call.
Hello, hi, this is Blaine Clark calling from Toronto, Ontario, Canada. This is kind of a little bit religious and, maybe scientific, but what's the correlation between black holes and the city Mecca and specifically the Kaaba, if there's any type of energetic correlation that you can tell us of? Thank you.
I think you wanted to find a relationship between black holes and the Kabbalah. I think that's what you said. Well, the Kabbalah talks about Jewish mysticism, and it talks about different layers of existence, specifically 10 layers of existence, and I'll say a few things about how that may intersect with, well, string theory physics, quantum physics. But first, let's take a short commercial break. Once again, you are listening to Science Fantastic with Professor Michio Kaku. Welcome back to Science Fantastic with Professor Michio Kaku. The lines are open. You're not going to get a busy signal. Here's your chance to ask that science question and get an answer on national radio. Well, the caller that just came in asked a question about, well, physics and religion, specifically spiritualism, specifically things like the Kabbalah. Well, let's say a few things about the potential relationship that some philosophers have zeroed in on. First of all, the Kabbalah has magic numbers. Certain numbers seem to be very important for the religion. For example, the letters of Yahweh. Yahweh is God, the Hebrew name for God. If you add up the letters, you get 26. And Kabbalism is a mystical Jewish religion that talks about layers of the universe. 10. Well, it turns out that 10 and 26 have magical meanings in string theory, so let me explain. String theory is the only theory known to science which selects out its own dimensionality. All theories, you input the fact that the universe is three-dimensional. Duh. I mean, how else are you going to do it, right? So all theories start with 3 dimensions. But string theory does not. String theory starts off as a quantum theory and then demands that strings move in a quantum mechanical form. To do that, that fixes the dimension of space and time, which is remarkable. It's the first time we've ever seen that in any physical theory. So the string theory dimensions are fixed by quantum mechanics. So these dimensions are computable. And when you take an ordinary string, allow a string like a violin string to vibrate quantum mechanically, it selects out the dimensionality as 26. Amazingly enough, 26 is the number of dimensions for what is called a bosonic string, which is also happens to be the dimensionality of the number of letters in the word Yahweh or God. Then it turns out when you make it super string theory, you add electrons. You add other kinds of spinning particles to the string, not just photons. And it changes the dimensionality to 10, which again is another sacred number of the Kabbalah. Now, is that a coincidence? I tend to think so. However, I guess you can't rule it out. But the point I'm raising is something very simple. There are magic numbers in spirituality, but there are also magic numbers in mathematics and, as a consequence, in mathematical physics. And the question is there a relationship between these magic numbers, in particular 10 and 26, and religion and spirituality and mathematical physics? The answer is, I don't know. But it does seem coincidental that some of these magic numbers do seem to coincide. Okay, well, let's move on to the next listener phone call.
Sean McCabe from Seattle. What is your best estimate of when a quantum computer will be available to the average citizen?
Well, you asked a $64,000 question, a question which is going to change human civilization. Now, we know that the creation of the computer and the microchip altered human civilization. The Internet, the spread of democracy, the changing of society itself was a consequence, and now we're going to witness the next big leap with quantum computers. But first, let's take a short commercial break. Welcome back to Science Fantastic with Professor Michio Kaku. Before the break, we had a question that could change the course of human civilization, and that is, when are we going to have quantum computers? Well, first of all, let me explain. Much of the prosperity that we've experienced in the last 30 years is due to Moore's Law, the fact that computer power doubles every 18 months. That's because on silicon wafers, we can cram more and more transistors on a tiny wafer, and that gave us, bingo, the iPhone. It gave us the wonders of the Internet and modern technology, simply carving out more and more transistors on a tiny wafer of silicon. Well, as you can imagine, that can't go on forever. As George Harrison once said, all things must pass, including Moore's Law. Moore's Law is already slowing down. That's right, Moore's Law is slowing down. At Christmas, we expect our toys and contraptions to be twice as powerful as they were the previous Christmas. Now, let me ask you a question. Would you buy a new computer? Would you buy an upgrade, knowing that the next model is just the same as the previous model of last year? Probably not. But then that's going to cause the computer revolution to crash, because we're so used to the idea that computer power doubles every 18 months. Well, that crash is coming sooner than you realize. Perhaps maybe in 15 years. No one knows for sure. But Moore's Law is slowing down. Transistors are becoming smaller and smaller. Today, your Pentium chip may have a layer 20 atoms across. That's how thin our layers of silicon are becoming, 20 atoms across. In 5-10 years, it'll be 5 atoms across. At that point, quantum mechanics takes over. You don't know where the electron is anymore. Heat is generated, and the computer crashes as a consequence. It short circuits, and it melts. Therefore, we're now looking at the post-silicon era. This is a multi-billion-dollar question. Silicon Valley may no longer be the engine of economic growth and prosperity. Silicon Valley could become a Rust Belt in the future, because we're going to need more and more computer power in a smaller and smaller space until eventually we compute on atoms. And when we compute on atoms, we need quantum computers. A quantum computer is rather simple. Let's take a bunch of atoms and put them in a line, put them in a magnetic field. These atoms are spinning, and they're like a spinning top. They align themselves in the direction of the magnetic field. They can be spin up or spin down like a top. However, in the quantum world, they can be spin up, spin down, or spin in between. Any number in between. So, this means that the language of quantum computers is no longer digital. We're so used to digital technology. That is, zeros and ones, zeros and ones, zeros and ones. But quantum computers are more powerful. They could be 0, 1, and a half. They could be numbers in between zeros and 1. So immediately you see the power of quantum computers. You can do a lot more with quantum computers than ordinary computers, such as breaking computer codes. You realize that all the great nations of the world use sophisticated computer codes to guard their secrets. It takes a computer perhaps millions, not millions, but hundreds of years to crack some of these codes. So it means that for the most part, these codes are unbreakable. But quantum computers can break them. Therefore, the CIA and the NSA have expressed interest in studying quantum computers. Now, recently, as you know, our government has acted like a sieve when it comes to government secrets. Everybody is leaking everything. Our government can't keep a secret for nothing if its life depended on it. Well, some of these secrets are rather interesting. By looking at some of these secret documents that are so freely circulated on the Internet now, we now realize that the CIA and the NSA, the National Security Agency, seriously looked at the military implications of quantum computers. What happens when quantum computers can break any code and access anyone's deepest secrets? Well, I'll give you the conclusion after the break. Let's take a short commercial break, and after the break, we're going to talk about what happens when all hell breaks loose when we get quantum computers. Welcome back to Science Fantastic with Professor Michio Kaku. Before the break, we mentioned the most fantastic computer technology coming down the pike is something called quantum computers. In fact, I was just speaking for IBM the other day, and a few months ago I spoke in Moscow to Russian scientists. All of them focus on the question of quantum computers. So let me explain. We live in the digital era where transistors can be zeros or ones, zeros and ones, and therefore you can send a code made out of zeros and ones. What happens if you could throw away this code and have 0, 1, or a half, or a third, or a quarter, or anything in between? Then, of course, obviously, you could have tremendous amounts of information transmitted rather than zeros and ones. That's where quantum computers come in. Atoms in a magnetic field can spin up or down. Therefore, atoms can convey digital information. But atoms can also be in between zeros and ones, and therefore transmit tremendous amounts of information. So much that you could break any code on the planet Earth. So, of course, the nations of the world are very much worried about this. This could be a game changer once we have quantum computers. Now, what's the catch? There's always a catch someplace, right? The catch is, because you're computing on individual atoms, this is a very delicate process, and any disturbance, any sneeze, any rumble from a mile away could disrupt your calculation. This is called decoherence. We want our atoms to vibrate in unison. Once there's a jiggling someplace miles away, it could cause an impurity, it could cause the signal to degrade, and it could ruin your calculation. So, in other words, quantum computers are great, but on paper, you have to worry about the slightest vibration. This is called decoherence, which is one of the main problems facing quantum computers. Now, the question was, when are we going to have quantum computers? The answer is, of course, I don't know. It's a question that will determine the fate of nations. The next Silicon Valley could become a quantum valley. When? I don't know. I think personally, on a scale of decades, it may take that amount of time before we have the ideal, perfect quantum computers. But right now, that doesn't stop inventors from creating partial quantum computers, and we're making inroads in them right now, even as we speak. First of all, we no longer use bits, because bits correspond to zeros and ones. We use qubits, or quantum bits, which can be in between zeros and one. How many qubits do you need before you can outrace any ordinary computer? And the answer to that is 50. So the next time you see a breakthrough in quantum computers in a magazine or on TV, listen when they say how many qubits they can calculate with. That is, how many atoms does it take to perform a calculation. If they can perform a calculation on 50 qubits, that's the point where a quantum computer can outrace and outperform an ordinary computer. So watch for that key number. Okay, let's move on now to the next listener phone call.
I'm Abhi Kareshwar from India, and my question is that will ever the neural implants be able to help us control how we see the world? I mean, will we be able to control the synaptic responses of our brain using artificial neurons? Thank you.
Well, you ask for a tall order. That is, can you actually change the way the neurons fire in the brain? Well, the short answer is no, we're not at that point. However, you don't have to do that in order to access the human brain. So let me explain. In my previous book called The Future of the Mind, I showed that a simple chip placed directly on top of the exposed brain can connect the brain to a laptop computer, and you can have a two-way conversation between the brain and a computer. This is called BCI, Brain-Computer Interface. And the simplest consequence is you could take someone who's paralyzed and give them the gift of movement once again. They can operate a wheelchair, turn on the lights, they can type, they can begin the process of surfing the web, communicating with their loved ones, even if they are totally paralyzed. Next, we can connect them to an avatar, a mechanical avatar, so that they can function almost normally. For example, if I have a brain chip connecting them to an exoskeleton devised by the military, they can walk, they can begin to manipulate objects around the moon with this external skeleton around their body. Now, Christopher Reeve, the famous actor who played Superman in the movies, died tragically. He was in an accident involving a horse, and his spinal cord was shattered, and he became a vegetable. His dream was to be able to walk once again. The sad thing is, well, he died years ago, but we can do that now. At Duke University, Professor Nicolelis, who I've had on this show, showed how it was possible to hook chips on the brain, connecting an individual to an exoskeleton, allowing him to kick the football, initiating the soccer games, the World Soccer Games in Sao Paulo, Brazil. This is amazing, the ability to connect the brain to an object, which will then connect you to an exoskeleton. Now, we can even do more than this. We can actually upload memories now and download memories in animals. In mice, we've been able to do this with simple memories, upload and download simple memories in mice. Now we're doing it on primates and eventually on Alzheimer's patients. And who knows, maybe one day you'll be able to learn calculus by simply pushing a button.